Good evening and welcome to This Week in Turkey. The sixth hearing of the lawsuit filed into the Gezi Park protests took place at the Istanbul 30th Heavy Penal Court in Silivri on February 18. The court ruled for the acquittal of 9 of the 16 defendants.
Announcing its ruling after the statements of defendants and their attorneys, the court board has ruled that 9 out of the 16 defendants shall be acquitted, as there was no concrete and material evidence as to the committal of the offenses charged. The files of the 7 defendants currently abroad shall be separated from others, and the arrest warrants previously issued against these defendants have been lifted. New warrants have been issued against them so that their depositions can be taken. The court has also ruled that philanthropist, businessperson, and rights defender Osman Kavala, the only arrested defendant of the case, shall be released. He had been behind bars for 840 days, accused of being one of the managers and organizers of the Gezi Park protests, which took place in Istanbul's Taksim in 2013, following harsh government response to a group of protesters trying to prevent the cutting down of trees for a large development project planned by the government. Between 15 and 20 years in jail was sought for 6 others: Çiğdem Mater Utku, Ali Hakan Altınay, Mine Özer'den, Şerafettin Can Atalay, Tayfun Kahraman, and Yiğit Ali Ekmekçi, over aiding attempted overthrow of the government. The defendants and lawyers pointed to the lack of evidence in the case, as well as the trial being a political one. Speaking at the court, Yapıcı said, "The Gezi resistance can't be tried. It doesn't have an organization or a leader. I respectfully bow in front of the 8 people who were killed during Gezi." The hearing of the case was attended by nearly 20 lawmakers from the main opposition Republican People's Party. Consul generals of Sweden, Switzerland, Canada, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands attended the hearing, as well as the envoys and envoy representatives of the Britain, Luxembourg, Belgium, Ireland, and the United States. Speaking at the weekly group meeting of his party this week, President and the ruling AKP chair Recep Tayyip Erdoğan said, "The person that you know stirred up trouble at Gezi was behind bars. They attempted to acquit him with a maneuver." Referring to Gezi as a civilian coup against the nation and the state, Erdoğan said that while he respected the verdict of the law, the judgment of our nation, as well as that of ourselves about Gezi and the ones who stood in its way, will never change. While the acquittal decision was met with surprise and happiness, the joy was short-lived. Hours after the hearing, the Istanbul Public Prosecutor's Office issued a new warrant against him as a part of the investigation into the failed 2016 coup attempt, widely believed to have been masterminded by the US-based Islamic preacher Fethullah Gülen. The prosecutors accused Kavala of attempting to overthrow the constitutional order in this case. Late on February 18th, police detained Kavala immediately after his release from Silivri prison, west of Istanbul, and took him to police headquarters after routine health checks. On February 19th, Kavala was referred to the prosecutor's office, where his testimony was taken in relation to the new investigation. Afterwards, he appeared before the court, which ruled for Kavala's rearrest. Elaborating on its decision, the court said Kavala had been in contact with one of the organizers of the coup attempt and added that they had met with people with links to the Kurdistan Workers' Party. Meanwhile, the Council of Judges and Prosecutors has given permission for an inquiry and investigation against the 3 judges of the Istanbul 30th Heavy Penal Court who gave a verdict of acquittal in Gezi Trial.
Politicians, international organizations, and rights defenders have reacted to the arrest on Osman Kavala after he was acquitted in the Gezi Trial.
Former European Court of Human Rights Judge Rıza Türmen referred to the detention of Osman Kavala as part of another investigation as unlawfulness. Türmen has underlined that the European Court of Human Rights verdict of right violation and immediate release on Osman Kavala applies to both investigations into Gezi and July 15 failed coup attempt. "We are aghast at the rearrest of Osman Kavala right after his acquittal. We call for swift clarification in compliance with all rule of law standards to which Turkey has committed," the German Federal Foreign Office said on Twitter. Sergei Lagodinsky, the chair of the Turkey delegation of the European Parliament, said that the decision to rearrest shows the Turkish judiciary system is out of balance. "Until comprehensive judicial and legal reforms will take place, we cannot talk about common European values and rules of law," Lagodinsky said. European Parliament Rapporteur on Turkey, Nacho Sanchez Amor, said that they were very disappointed, deceived, and sad with the decision to keep Kavala in jail. Kati Piri, a member and the former Turkey rapporteur of the European Parliament, tweeted, after 2.5 years innocently in jail, he was acquitted this morning in the Gezi trial from 2013, and then Istanbul prosecutor decides to rearrest him for the coup attempt in 2016. Madness. The Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights, Dunja Mijatovic, said in a written statement that the hope I felt yesterday with the acquittals and the decision to release Kavala was unfortunately very short-lived. It is difficult not to note a similarity between this rearrest and what happened in the cases concerning Ahmet Altan, Selahattin Demirtas, and Taner Kılıç. Human Rights Watch Turkey director Emma Sinclair-Webb told Reuters that we have seen Turkey's justice system turned into an absurd, cruel theater.
There have also been reactions from Turkey in relation to Kavala's rearrest.
People's Republican Party MP and human rights lawyer Sezgin Tanrıkulu posted a photo of himself, People's Democratic Party MP Hüda Kaya, and Osman Kavala on his Twitter account. Tanrıkulu tweeted, despite yesterday's acquittal and release decision, Osman Kavala has been rearrested 24 hours later on the same charges. There could not be a better explanation than this, that there is no judiciary in Turkey. But of course, this oppression will end. People's Democratic Party MP and journalist Ahmet Şık has said, Mr. Kavala was a valuable hostage for Erdogan in terms of the relations between this state, this cause, especially this government, and the West. If his verdict of acquittal had been finalized, then you would have to ask, against what ransom had the Erdogan regime had this decision taken? I had been asking this since the verdict was announced. I had no answer. But it seems that, for now, there is a departure from this verdict of acquittal not given despite Erdogan, from this verdict given despite the organization called Pelikan within the judiciary. It is also a good sign as to the dimension of the fracture and conflict on the government through judiciary. I will stick to my points that the course of events is not in favor of the government. Nobody should lose hope. This mafia regime cannot live up to the end of 2020. Journalist Kadri Gürsel has stated, they were apparently up to something, as right after the verdict of acquittal was given in Gezi Trial, they made their Twitter trolls and bot accounts open a hashtag putting Gezi and coup side by side and made this hashtag a trending topic. We are unabashedly on the top when it comes to the use of the judiciary as a weapon. Republican People's Party Group Deputy Chair Özgür Özel has stated, the upper verdict on Kavala proves that Erdogan has turned the issue into a vendetta to such an extent that he had a verdict given upon an instruction to invalidate the judiciary. Kavala will be released sooner or later. The ones who caused the deaths in Gezi, who instructed the judiciary, will be put on trial sooner or later. CHP Istanbul Chair Canan Kaftancıoğlu stated, you will drown in your unlawfulness. An unlawful act committed against a person means an unlawful act committed against the whole society.
This evening, we have the Turkey Director for Human Rights Watch, Emma Sinclair-Webb, with us on our Skype line. Good evening, Emma. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Shirin.
So on Tuesday, the court ruled for the acquittal of the 9 of the 16 defendants in the Gezi trial. This was an unexpected decision, and as a matter of fact, the joy was short-lived because shortly after Mr. Kavala was once again arrested for charges relating to the attempted coup attempt, the coup attempt in 2016, for which he had been discharged in October 2019. So how do you evaluate these developments, and why is there such an insistence on keeping Mr. Kavala behind bars?
Well, to take a step back, I mean, obviously the decision to acquit him in the Gezi trial, along with the other defendants who were there that day, came as a sort of big surprise to everyone in the trial room, because the trial itself had been such a brutal experience, I would say, with, lawyers' efforts to present evidence or to have evidence examined repeatedly rejected, and a really quite a hostile stance by the court towards the defendants. And the whole case was a bogus case anyway. So, of course, acquittal actually was the only correct decision. So we were pleased, but it was a very bittersweet feeling of, that Osman Kavala had been held for over 2 years in prison, wrongfully held. that the court had up till now disregarded the European Court of Human Rights judgment on the case, which called for his immediate release, and ruled that Turkey had used detention for political purposes. And so all of this happened, and then a few hours later, the chief prosecutor issued this extraordinary statement that he was going to be detained again in connection with the coup attempt. Clearly this shows that there was a huge motivation from the top to prevent Osman Kavala getting out of prison. And really the next day, over the next hours, everything became clearer and yet not clearer, because we had the president's speech, which definitively gave an instruction that he shouldn't have been acquitted in the Gezi case, and obviously made it absolutely clear that he was going to be arrested once again by the court, that he would be jailed by the court again. And then the court decision came. So it was a whole day of a sort of roller coaster day, ending last night at 10:55 with this decision that he's going to be rearrested. But as soon as the president opened his mouth, the result was clear. And we saw that the most surprising thing of all of this is that a court that had been very hostile to Osman Kavala throughout his trial acquitted him, and acquitted him clearly on orders. That I think we can presume that's the case. And the same orders, the orders came again for the very reverse decision. So it's a schizophrenic process, an extremely brutal process that absolutely is the test case in proving that Turkey's courts are totally under political control when it comes to any case concerning a government critic or somebody who's a perceived government critic, or a case which the government regards as, the presidency regards as sensitive in any way. And of course, that's thousands of cases. And the irony in all of this is, we know that Silivri prison is packed full of people who shouldn't be there and who are unjustly, wrongfully detained on no evidence, arbitrarily just associated with terrorism, or with the coup plot, or with the group that did the coup plot, though they were not themselves involved in anything like terrorism. And this is a pattern which, we've been living for the last few years, but I think the Osman Kavala case has revealed it so explicitly, displayed to the world just what a sham and a theatre the Turkish justice system has become.
There have been allegations in the past that Turkey negotiated with the West regarding certain unlawful detentions. For example, in the case of Deniz Yücel or Lou Bureau, there have been negotiations both with the German and the French governments regarding their journalists who were imprisoned in Turkey. Now, obviously, Mr. Kavala is not a European citizen, so in that sense, he doesn't have that kind of backing. Do you think there's a will from the West to go beyond simply condemning these violations?
I think, of course, we've been highly critical of the European Union, particularly for the absolute priority given to the EU-Turkey migration deal, which is all about preventing onward migration into the European Union, and of course this comes up at every time that this is the main priority a lot of the time, and it means it's very difficult for human rights issues to rise to the top of being priorities for Western European countries, for EU countries. However, the political relationship with the EU is very bad over human rights. The situation in Turkey is clearly understood. And I think the place really where it will be important to now push and to advocate is at the Council of Europe level, because the European Court of Human Rights case on Osman Kavala, the case against Turkey, is really one of the most important European court judgments against Turkey ever. It finds that Turkey misuses the detention warrants for political purposes and has sham trials, essentially. And this very important judgment also takes in the new charges or the new allegations against Osman Kavala. And by the way, they're not new allegations, as you said. This is an older investigation into him for involvement in the July 15th coup attempt, again, based on absolutely no evidence, some ridiculous charge that he, talked to somebody or met with somebody. There's no account of a conspiracy or any criminal act. And the European Court case actually refers to that investigation into the coup trial, into the coup plot as well. So I think now it will be very important in the months ahead for the Council of Ministers and the Department of the Execution of Judgments at the European Court to really take up this case and actually look at Turkey's absolute non-compliance with court rulings. I know that sounds quite technical. You could say, oh, well, Turkey just ignores the European Court, it ignores all the mechanisms of the Council of Europe. But I think there is still a way in which Turkey is constantly playing with the rules of the European Court and dodging around, trying to get Osman Kavala removed. Okay, the Gezi trial is over now. Now we're into a new phase where he's going to be indicted, presumably, in relation to the 15th of July coup. They think it's a new process, a different process. But actually, I think this time the European Court case against Turkey is very, very strong on this point and really exposes how politicized this case is altogether, and how politicized the treatment of Osman Kavala has been. So I think it's a strong tool to look at and to use in the months ahead.
So Emma, you've been in Turkey for a while, and you've been following these cases against human rights defenders in Turkey. According to what you said, it's kind of a redundant question, but how optimistic are you for the near future of Turkey's human rights defenders?
Well, I think, what we saw in evidence in this whole trial, the Gezi trial, was, how civil society did come together to insist on the case and to raise the case very strongly. And it's clear that, there is a large constituency in Turkey that is very dissatisfied with these very wrongful court rulings that we're repeatedly seeing. Turkey has, quite a dynamic civil society, yes, increasingly marginalized. Human rights defenders have been squarely targeted. But I think, Turkey is a country, an extremely flawed democracy. But nevertheless, the expectations of the population and of civil society are that they deserve better than this. And people just don't buy it, that these kinds of trumped-up cases are carrying on against them. And I think, we shouldn't, all societies are ahead of the politicians. That applies in every country, most of the time. And I think, there's been a growing dissatisfaction with precisely this kind of ruling. So I think, there is much to play for in Turkey. There's much to argue. A lot of people want a more democratic country and full respect for human rights, and that's what they deserve. They deserve to be treated with dignity. And people, I think, will carry on demanding dignified treatment and justice. So I think, to come back to your earlier question, Osman Kavala is not a foreigner. Yeah, he's a Turkish citizen. And for that reason, European governments are not going to necessarily make the same efforts for him that they've made for their own nationals. And that is very regrettable. However, I think the case has been so brazen, so craven, the abuse in this case, and the cruelty, that I think, Turkey will have a lot of problems explaining this. It also shows a fundamental weakness in the judicial system, and in the changes, the flipping from one thing to another. How can you have an acquittal one day, a rearrest the next day? It does not look a strong and convincing sign that things are going in the right direction. And it doesn't present Turkey's authorities in at all a good light. It's not dignified for them either, I guess.
Emma Sinclair-Webb, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
No diplomatic breakthrough has been reached this week regarding the situation in Syria's Idlib, as the round of talks did not end with concrete results.
Turkey and Russia, which back opposing sides in Syria's war, agreed in 2018 to set up a de-escalation zone in the northwestern province. But their fragile cooperation has been disrupted by a Syrian government offensive in Idlib, in which 13 Turkish soldiers have been killed in the past 2 weeks. Further, an airstrike has killed 2 more Turkish soldiers on February 20, according to the Ministry of Defense. The ministry has stated that over 50 regime elements, 5 tanks, 2 armored personnel vehicles, 2 armed pickups, 1 howitzer were destroyed in Idlib in retaliation. Ankara has said it will use military power to drive back the Syrian forces unless they withdraw by the end of February, and President Erdogan has said Turkey will strike government forces anywhere in Syria if another Turkish soldier was hurt. The Kremlin, which has supported Syria's Bashar al-Assad's push with airstrikes, said a clash between Turkish and Syrian forces would be a worst-case scenario, and Russia would work to prevent the situation from worsening. Erdogan discussed the situation in separate phone calls with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday and US President Donald Trump on February 15, but there was no immediate word of a diplomatic breakthrough. Erdogan and Trump exchanged views on an immediate halt to fighting in Idlib, the Turkish presidency said. The 2 leaders agreed by phone that Syrian government forces' attacks in the northwestern province were unacceptable. Speaking at the UN Security Council meeting in New York, Washington's envoy to the UN, Kelly Craft, said Washington unequivocally rejects statements by Russian officials falsely blaming Turkey for the escalation of the violence in northwest Syria. The United States will continue to coordinate with Turkey on diplomatic approaches to restore a ceasefire to the Idlib de-escalation zone and achieve a pullback of Assad regime forces to 2018 Sochi ceasefire, said Kraft. Russia says Turkey, which has poured military forces into Idlib, has aggravated the situation and failed to neutralize militants there. But Turkey blames the situation on the advances by Syrian government forces in Idlib. Erdogan said Turkey would drive back Syrian forces unless they withdraw to the borders outlined by Ankara and Moscow in 2018. Speaking to lawmakers from his ruling Justice and Development Party on February 19, Erdogan said Turkey was determined to make Idlib a secure zone. We are entering the last days for the regime to stop its hostility in Idlib. We are making our final warnings, said Erdogan. He further added that Turkey has made every preparation to carry out its own operational plans. I say that we can come at any point. In other words, the Idlib offensive is only a matter of time. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said Turkey wanted to resolve matters with Russia over Idlib through diplomacy. Further, Çavuşoğlu said after his talks with Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference that disagreements between Moscow and Ankara over Syria's Idlib will have no impact on the deliveries of S-400 missile defense systems nor on the 2 countries' ties in general.
Former President Abdullah Gül has declared support for Ali Babacan, a former prime minister who has been in preparations to form a new party after resigning from the Justice and Development Party last year.
While the 2 former senior figures of the AKP have long been rumored to be in cooperation, this was the first time that Gül admitted his support for Babacan. Of course, I support the party. I am a person who trusts and appreciates Mr. Babacan's character, education, knowledge, and style of politics, he told columnists from Daily Karar in an interview. However, he ruled out joining the party, saying, I had said I would not be active in politics after I left the presidency, so I am not in daily politics. However, it cannot be expected that I keep my experience for myself when there are bitter problems for the country. It is both my right and my duty to duly contribute to politics and share my views on the basic issues that I see in my country's benefit. a founding member of the AKP, Gül served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs between 2003 and 2007 and the President between 2007 and 2014, preceding Recep Tayyip Erdoğan.
A puppy has become the latest addition to a school in the northern province of Tokat's Turhal district.
The puppy, whom the students have named Fındık, meaning hazelnut, was found in a cemetery. The school principal Ahmet Aktürk and teacher Mustafa Önlen saw a group of stray dogs attacking a puppy. The teachers intervened in the attack and saved the puppy, bringing it to the school and building a shelter for it in the schoolyard. The 37 students of the village school showed great interest and care to the puppy from the first day. Fındık has become the mascot of the school. Always following the students around the school, Fındık eventually started making a habit out of going to classes, wearing a school uniform sold by Bedriye Göçer, the head of the School Family Association.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.